Hello, welcome and good evening. This is our live development stream for May 2020. And I'd like to welcome all of you. Hope you're all safe and sound. And yes, today we'll be talking about the audio frequency node for Lightwave 3D that we have started to develop for our patrons last month. And it is going to get finished this month. And we also did release a preview version to our patrons at the beginning of the month. And yeah, today we're going to talk about the next steps and what's left to do until the end of the month to really polish this into a proper product that you can use productively in your scenes. So this is the demo animation that you probably all seen by now, that we did post on YouTube a couple of days ago, well, a couple of weeks ago actually, which was just a quick test. And this will also be available for patrons eventually. And yeah, let's see at the work or the things that we're currently working on and at what is left to do. So we go to the instance generator. Right now, go to the nodes. Yes, so all the windows open on the other display. And this is essentially something that you know already. You have the audio frequency node there. It displays the whole spectrum here. The spectrum is being displayed here as well. One thing that we changed is you can toggle the real-time preview. If it's off, then it doesn't actually update here, which improves the system performance. One thing that we actually couldn't do is, or one thing I tried is when you toggle real-time preview and you have it off, to turn this off, but that only half works because Lightwave then removes the top section of the node, but still draws the image on top of the node. It's a bug that's been reported and it will eventually be fixed, but yeah, not in time for this to work the way it's supposed to. So what the real-time preview toggle does, it just turns off the drawing into the thumbnails there, but it doesn't actually disable this one. And even if you have the real-time preview disabled, you can still click refresh, and that's at least going to update this panel here, or this preview here in the node user interface. Most of the stuff, actually all of the stuff that I've been working on so far for this month has been on the select panel. And you will be able to get to this by pressing select here. And yeah, got the display. And this opens this panel, which I'm right now calling the audio spectrum picker. So what this shows you is the audio spectrum on the left-hand side. It shows you the waveform around the current frame underneath that, which used to be just some debugging code in there, but it's probably going to stay. And yes, this preview is live as well. So as we scrub through the scene, this is going to update. It might be a bit slow here, but that's because this is a debug build. So the way this is supposed to work is that this is meant to give you a graphical overview of the audio spectrum, and the idea is that here you can actually select ranges that you're interested in of the audio, so you can see what's happening, and then you might say, okay, I'm just interested in the bass down here, and you click on that, and it changes the frequency to 75 hertz in this case, and that's the frequency that the node is eventually going to use. Now in this case, because I'm using it as an instance generator, and I'm using one of the inputs, the frequency here is actually disabled, but if I just turn this or disconnect this, you will see that the frequency is now being set to 75. what the picker does is all of these controls here are exact mirrors of the ones here in the node. So if, for example, you will want to change from picking a single frequency to picking a frequency range, you don't have to go back to the node, toggle the mode to range, and then go back to the picker, but you can change it in the picker, and then it will, as you just saw, update in the node as well. So if I go back to single, it goes back here, and even disables the control or enables the controls the way it's supposed to. Now, a single frequency, you can just click and select. This is something I just added. So you can actually drag and select it as well. That works the way it's supposed to. And what it displays here is basically the something I just talked about the last time, is the frequencies are being collected into bins that are based on octaves. And this basically shows you which bin the currently selected frequency belongs to. And if you select graphically like this, it's going to select the frequency in the middle of that bin. And the nice thing is it also gives me something to draw that's more than just a line, which is why I just changed that. The vertical extent of the box is actually decibels. So this is 0 decibels. This is currently minus 65. The very bottom is, I think, minus 96. So if you change this, then this is also going to change the vertical size of that bar. And you will notice that, here there's hardly going to be any audio that's going to reach it there. And this is something that you will eventually also be able to do graphically. The idea is that probably if you just click on here, you will just select the frequency, and then maybe you can press Control or something, and then select the maximum and minimum decibel level, and maybe even have the option to click next to the border of the selection and then just extend it from there. Which for a single frequency isn't that interesting, but if we move over to a frequency range, then one thing you can already do in this version is drag out a box, and it's going to select it. And there's a slight offset here, but in general that works. And as you can see, this only selects horizontal frequencies, but not the vertical decibels. That will change. And since this is just early development for the selection process, you can even select something down here, and it's going to select the frequencies up there as well. So yeah, that is essentially the current state. Most of the work has been done on the selection mechanisms and drawing a nice selection, drawing everything that's outside of the selected area in a more muted or darkened background. Let's just turn this a bit bigger, 70 decibels. And as you can actually see, if I change the decibels here to, let's say, minus 50, then that's also going to change the preview in the node itself, whereas this preview shows you the full vertical extent of the analyzed audio. So one thing that I'm very likely to do is we do have, as a frequency mode or selection mode, we have the single frequency, which is perfectly fine. We do have the range, where you have a start and an end frequency. And there's also the single plus extent mode, which is essentially going to be something like you pick a center frequency and then a range to the left and to the right. I'm probably going to drop that because it's going to be fairly confusing to use. So that is, for now, certainly out. Also, one thing that is going to be added, we do have the option to interpolate. So if the current frequency is like not between two bins, but next to inside of one of the frequency bins here, it will look at the ones that's next to it, either to the left or to the right, and then interpolate the values. So if you use something like use the an input that is derived from, let's say, coordinates of vertices on a mesh, that you will get a smooth interpolation from one vertex to the next, and not just one that is going to step up or down as soon as the threshold to the next frequency bin is reached. It's probably easier to visualize than to talk about, but essentially it's like if you imagine the frequency bins to be like pixels, it's like enlarging an image and either using no interpolation where the pixels just get bigger, or using some kind of interpolation where it smooths things out. It's the same thing essentially. One thing that I'm thinking about adding is going to be a smoothing across time, because if you look at the frequency changes here in some areas, that they are fairly harsh from frame to frame. And to smooth that out, one option is to take the current amplitude at the current frame and maybe a few frames before and a few next frames, add them all up, average them, and then output that, which would give you essentially slower amplitude or softer amplitude changes, which for some styles of audio might make more sense than rigidly following the frequency distribution per frame as we do right now. Which, if you look at how this is being visualized, which can lead to some fairly harsh movements here, and you might want to smooth those out. I hope the audio isn't too loud. So, you might want to get rid of the jittery things, the jittery parts here, and the smoothing across time would really help with that. All right. So, yeah, this is the current state. So essentially, the things that are left to do is all of the interpolation logic, either in time or in the frequency domain. Fixing, or not fixing, but finishing the whole selection logic here. How to not just pick a frequency range, but also a volume range. Also, one thing to note that took me a while to find out why it was happening. Well, not a while, but I was surprised. Is you can click on the left and extend to the right, and also click on the right and extend to the left. This doesn't really look like it's much, but initially I took the initial point where I click on the spectrum as my start, and then the point I was dragging to as my end position. However, if you would drag from the right to the left, that would cause the start to be higher than the end, and that the starting frequency should always be lower than the end frequency. So I had to add some extra logic to take care of that and swap both around if the start is bigger than the end, which shouldn't happen. So, which basically means you can now drag both ways. It's going to be okay. Looks like there's yeah, if they're both in the same bin, you get something like this. But that should work. So yeah, you can drag both ways, and it displays something decent. Oh, and one thing I forgot, because that has actually been added already. Let's go to frame 3000. Actually, two more things. One thing is if I go to the single mode, and yeah, normally the frequency should be disabled here. Don't know why it isn't. But regardless, depending on the connections here on the node, some of these, or the controls that are equivalent to the inputs, are usually disabled in the user interface. In the audio spectrum picker, these controls are always available, regardless of whether the inputs are connected to something or whether they're not connected, because you can actually, change these. They might not be used if something connected to the node input overrides them, but this still allows you to edit all of them regardless of how the node is connected. All right, so the thing to show is, yeah, I did the wrong thing here, but let's go to frame 3000. I've got auto key all channels on. I'm going to the range mode. I'm going to look at this range, and I'm going to add an envelope here to the frequency and to the end frequency. Now they're both animated, and I'll just select something. Oh, great, great. This is exactly how it's not supposed to work. Oh yeah, okay, it's not updating. So what I've done now is I've selected something else at frame 3000. These are both enveloped, and I've actually added a key now, because if I scrub to the beginning, you will see that the selection changes as well. And if I select something else here, might need to update the frame. Yeah, I do. I actually don't know why, because I'm actually telling it to update here. So yeah, might be something that's a bit finicky at the moment. So basically, in the beginning at frame 0, I've got something around from 32 to 139 Hertz selected. At the end, it doesn't update here either, but it's selecting something in the end. And as you can see, as I scrub through, is that the range is animated. It's showing here, and we've also set keys in the envelopes just the way it's supposed to be. That's if auto key is on. Otherwise, if it's either modified or existing, then it's only going to create or update the keyframe if you actually are on a key. And to facilitate that, I'm going to be drawing a border around the spectrum window, just so you can see that you're actually on a key for any of the values here, which could also be the decibels. Yeah, so things to do. Finish the selection logic here. Make sure that the refresh of the selected rectangle works and stuff like that, but that's not that much that's left to do. One big thing, and that's more in the whole background of how the audio is being stored and managed, is and that also is going to affect the outputs here, is the way files with more than one audio channel are being handled. At the moment, it's just taking the sum of all the channels, which in a stereo file basically means it's going to make a mono file out of that. There should be an option to either use the sum of all the channels, like it does now, or specific channels within the audio file, so you can just have the audio frequency being computed for the left or the right channel, which will eventually also give you the option to have two audio frequency nodes in a node graph, have one process the left channel, one process the right channel, and then do something depending on the difference between those two, which would give you some kind of stereo effect that you can use for rendering or for animation, which could be fairly interesting. So yeah, multi-channel support. And then once that is done, essentially the thing that's missing is going to be the channel modifier and a simplified version of this node, which doesn't allow you to select any frequencies, but we can just say, okay, just give me the bass and the mids, and don't let I don't want to bother with any of the settings here and picking any ranges and things like that. So yeah, that is the current state. Also, it wasn't actually, so note that it was actually fixed in the previous release. What it works now is you can actually replace the audio file here. That works as it should. Also, Previously, when you opened the settings and did anything that closed this window again, then it would load the audio file into layout. That has been fixed. And one thing that's interesting about the picker, it basically remembers the last plugin it was called from. So in this case, I'm using it from the instance generator. And as you can see, it's open here, and I can just leave it open. And I can go to my surfaces. There we go. And I go to my sphere, and I open that, and that also has an audio frequency node. And I can open it from this one, and now it's actually showing me the settings from this audio frequency node and not from the other one. I might need to actually update the headline if I can, so that you know which node this was actually opened from. But the idea is that the picker can always stay open, or you can just have it available somewhere wherever you want to. And whichever node you open it from, that's going to be the one that you're going to pick for. So let's see, maybe, not sure if this works, but let's give it a try. Let's just replace this with another audio file. Boom. Well, yeah. This is all live. This is a debug build. Okay, why didn't that sort? Thank you very much. I just start this again. But yeah, essentially the idea is that the picker works, I suppose, like the node editor does right now. It's always going to be the same node editor, but what it displays, what you work on, depends on where you open the node editor from. And that's going to be exactly the same thing for the picker. So eventually, if we have, maybe a channel modifier, an audio frequency channel modifier, then that is also going to use the same node, not only the same node picker, but even the same node picker or the spectrum picker window as all the other plugins do. So yeah, that is the current state of things. Can't really say much more. So yeah, if you have any questions, suggestions, whatever, please feel free. Oh, great. And now I can actually see the chat because I had to pop it out. And hello to everybody. Sorry, I didn't say hello earlier because the embedded chat window didn't show anything, but now that I've popped it out of YouTube, I can see everybody. Let me just actually read through that. All right, you all come in peace. No, you cannot zoom in or zoom out. One thing that I might do is the preview in the node currently shows you the area, at least vertically, in as far as the volume is concerned, from the minimum level to the maximum level, not from the absolute minimum, but from the one that you select here. So if I change this to minus, let's make it minus 40, you will see that this changes what's being displayed here. So in a way, this shows you the vertical zoom in terms of zooming into the volume. Um, Sakutsu, hi. It's going to be recorded, so you'll be able to watch it. Um, yeah, so you kind of have a vertical zoom there. A zoom here, I'm not sure if that is really necessary, because the whole thing does scale up. And I think, adding zoom into that is going to be a bit too much, because that would require drawing things differently and changing the selection logic. And yeah, I think this is probably sufficient. Yeah, moving forward and backward to the next preview. Well, the problem is, if I add a button to move to the next or previous button, keyframe, it would be any of the keyframes on any of these of the envelopes. So you wouldn't know precisely which one you're on. And just as I mentioned it earlier, that I'm going to draw a border around this thing for different keyframes, you obviously won't know if you're on a keyframe for the frequency or for the maximum level in decibels or the minimum level. You just don't know. So yeah, it's not going to be that pretty. On the other hand, I would argue that animating this directly here is more like a borderline use case. So I suppose most people will just maybe rough things out here and then go into the graph editor and work there some more. And well, I hope they do. And if you look at it, you will also see that the envelopes are going to be in a nice bin just specific for the plugin. Yeah, there's 4 values. That's the thing. There's not just those 2 or those 3, but there's also the end frequency if you're going to the extent. And then yeah, you would have 8 extra buttons just to step. And then I would probably have to redo the whole. I could redo the whole user interface there a bit, but yeah, makes it tricky. I'll think about that. That might be one way to do it. Is just yeah, kind of add 2 buttons underneath each one of these values directly in there. That is next keyframe, previous keyframe, or something. So yeah, that's basically it. Sakutsu, I basically just talked about the main changes since the preview build that we sent out, and what I've been focusing on is the audio spectrum picker, which can be opened from the node and allows you to select a part of the spectrum, which is going to be the area that you will get the output from in the node. And you can also select single frequencies directly here. So, basically, I mean, the idea is that you can scrub through your audio and just, look at what's happening there. And then, pick the bits that you're interested in and say, all right, I see something happening in the bass down here, so I want to pick that area. This is the part that interests me. And eventually you will also be able to change the minimum and maximum level that you're grabbing things from. And this waveform underneath there was initially there for debugging, but I think I'm going to keep it there. Yeah, I did post a lot on Discord today. Basically because until the beginning of this week, we were quite busy developing a shopping cart for our website, believe it or not. So yeah, also one thing that we have is, I mean, the crosshair might stay, might go, I'm not sure yet. You also get a live preview on the frequencies that you're looking at down here. So as you can see, as I move the mouse over the spectrum, it changes the frequency reading here. I like the color of the crosshair and the color of the waveform. Yes, and the color of the rectangle. Those are all very pretty colors. Yeah, so you probably could. I mean, you can use it. I haven't really done much with volumetrics in the recent versions of Lightwave, but I'm sure you could take something like a position in space and use that to drive the frequency and the time, for example, and then in turn use the output volume as, I don't know, density, for example, for something that's volumetric. Let me just see if that old demo scene and my first demo scene still works, but it should. I think it's this one. That's the one I showed, I think, the last time. And you know what we're doing here, yeah, it's working, is on the plane in this case, I have a nodal displacement, and I am essentially using the, what don't I need? I don't need this. Yeah. I'm using the x coordinate, which is this one, to determine which frequency I want to look at. And I'm using the an offset, oh no, I'm using the z coordinate as an offset into time, into the time of the audio file, to also compute the amplitude. So basically, these are the low frequencies on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you have the high frequencies. Close to the camera, you have the current time, and away from the camera, you have the time past a number of seconds. I think it's 5 seconds down here or something. And as we're scrubbing through the scene, and time passes, you basically have the whole thing just, you know, moving through like this. And also the stepping that you see here on the left-hand side, that's going to be gone once I've added an interpolation option. So you know, the way the way I'm extracting things here from the audio file for something that is 2D, you probably use that to drive something that is 3D as well. The output you will get from the node is always going to be a single scalar value, but how you drive it is entirely up to you. But of course, the input into the node is also going to be scalars, but it's going to be different scalars. I mean, in this case, it's the only input that's actually being used is the spectrum, which drives the frequency and the time offset. Those two things, and the only output is the amplitude, and that in turn is being used to just offset the vertical position of the vertices, which for something volumetric you could use to drive density, for example. I'm not sure how that would look, but yeah, it could actually be pretty cool to have like a volumetric cloud that reacts to audio. Sure. Also, one thing we've been discussing is that it would certainly be possible to use an audio file to drive a particle emitter. So, you know, let's say drive it by using the base of the audio and directly. No, I didn't. I haven't got it working yet. The main focus this week so far was on the whole selection picker or the spectrum picker here. Once I've got this sorted out, that's when I'm going to finish up the last interpolations that I want to add and support for more audio channels, including the outputs for them. So one thing, for example, and that's going to be easier once the channel modifier is there, which is going to be a basic version of the audio frequency node, is, for example, to take the base of an audio file and use that to drive the amount of particles emitted by an emitter. And, things like that. So I suppose, once you have the values in Lightwave, there's a whole ton that you can do with them. So yeah, any more questions? Because I'm starting to repeat myself for the third time now. And if there aren't any questions, for example, yeah, of course, I'm, looking forward to you guys' sample scenes as well. And I know that at least Michael is working on something that is looking very promising so far, but he's waiting for a channel modifier. So yeah, that's the current state. I'll don't really want to make promises, but there should be at least a preview version sometime next week, and with most of the stuff in there. And then you can work on it a bit more. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you are going to produce with it. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I have nothing else to talk about, at least not on that subject. So a big thanks to all the patrons for supporting us. Means a lot to us. Thanks to everybody else for coming in to listen in and to watch. I hope you found this interesting. If you are not a patron, link is in the description below. And you can be one for as little as, I think, $3 per month, which gives you all the plugins right now, all personalized with your name in the About box. And yes, the next live stream will be at the end of the month, likely after you got the at least a preview build, and that's going to be one of the more intimate Q&A streams. Sure, you could. Sure. Andrew asks if this could be used to drive one of the db&w tool splines. Yeah, I mean, with the channel modifier directly. And since that channel modifier doesn't exist yet, what you can do is you can add a nodal motion modifier to a null object, and then tell one of the spline control points to follow that null object. That would work now. And the channel modifier would eventually allow you to specifically just animate one motion channel on a spline control point. Oh, thank you, Mary. That's nice to read. Well, yeah, so big thanks to all of you for showing up on a Friday evening. But I suppose for many of us, there isn't that much else to do because you can't go out or shouldn't. So yeah. Oh yes, and since I've mentioned it, if you are a patron, you do get a 1% discount per month that you support us, up to a maximum of 12%. And on our regular products. And yeah, we did release updates for Lightwave 2020 this month, and quite a few of the patrons also got their 12% discounts. So yeah, thanks to all of you. Have a nice evening. Have a nice weekend. stay safe, and yeah, wash your hands. Well, maybe not only your hands, but stay safe. Bye bye.